The old man never heard the group of footsteps circling him. He only felt the sudden silence, the kind of silence that forms when something cruel is about to happen. His white cane tapped helplessly against the hot asphalt as he tried to reach for the sandwich that had fallen from his trembling hand. The laughter that followed was sharp, heartless, and young. He couldn't see the faces around him, but he felt their shadows like cold walls closing in. At 75, completely blind, hungry, and alone, he never imagined that the world could still be this unkind. Yet, at that very moment outside the diner, with his dignity slipping away just like the sandwich lying crushed near his elbow, the old man realized something painful. Sometimes the world doesn't just look away from suffering, it entertains itself with it. If you believe kindness, courage, and second chances still matter, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps stories like these reach more hearts. His name was Henry Dawson, a retired librarian, widowed for nearly 2 decades, living quietly on a pension that barely covered his bills. And although Henry had been blind for 6 years due to a fast-moving eye disease, he had learned to navigate most of his life with a cautious sort of bravery. But some days were harder than others, and today had been one of his worst. He had walked to the diner because his cupboard at home was empty again. He was already embarrassed that he had to ask the cashier to help him count his cash. He carried his small meal outside, listening to the familiar sounds of passing cars, clinking cutlery, distant conversations, until the boys appeared. He didn't know there were bikers nearby. He didn't know help was coming. He only knew the sound of cruelty too well. The boys weren't cruel because they were evil. They were cruel because they were young, arrogant, and surrounded by each other's laughter. The world hadn't taught them yet that pain echoes. They nudged Henry's cane away from his hand. They pushed his sandwich across the ground. They shoved him gently just to see him lose balance. Someone even kicked the cane behind him, so he'd unknowingly crawl in the wrong direction. The boys laughed like it was entertainment. Henry begged them to stop, voice breaking, knees scraping the ground as he blindly reached. He didn't want to shout for help. Dignity is stubborn like that. But even dignity has breaking points. Henry wasn't aware that on the far side of the parking lot, a biker club had gathered. Big motorcycles lined up in chrome rows, heavy boots, leather vests, tattooed arms crossed. These men looked intimidating to most people, but in truth, they were a tightly knit group of veterans, blue-collar workers, fathers, husbands, men who had made mistakes, learned from them, and now protected kindness more fiercely than most. And among them was their leader, a towering figure with a beard like steel and a look that could freeze thunder. His name was Mason. Mason had seen many things in his life, but when he saw the blind elderly man on the ground with a sandwich scattered like crumbs of dignity surrounded by laughing teens who were pointing and filming him for fun, something primal and protective ignited inside him. Mason wasn't a man who roared often. He didn't need to. When he moved, people usually understood, and this time he moved fast. Henry didn't hear motorcycles rev or heavy boots approach. All he felt was the laughter abruptly stopping. Every mocking sound sliced away, replaced by a strange, heavy silence that felt different from the earlier one. This silence wasn't the silence of cruelty. It was the silence of consequences. The boys turned around and saw Mason standing there with 4 of his men behind him. No weapons, no threat, just presence. Presence can be louder than any punch. Mason didn't raise his voice, didn't chase them, didn't touch them. He simply stared at them with a look that peeled away their arrogance layer by layer until the boys realized what they looked like. Cowards bullying someone who couldn't even see them. In that moment, they weren't laughing anymore. They weren't recording anymore. They were just ashamed. They backed away, mumbling excuses that didn't matter, and in seconds disappeared down the street. Henry, confused, tried to sit up. His knee throbbed. His hands shook. He whispered something, thinking the boys were still there. But then he felt a large, steady hand gently grip his shoulder. Mason lowered himself, careful not to startle him, letting his deep voice soften to a tone no one in the parking lot had heard him use before. He told Henry he was safe now. He placed the cane into Henry's hand and gathered the sandwich pieces, not to salvage them, but simply to remove them from the ground, so Henry wouldn't accidentally reach into scattered crumbs and feel humiliated again. What struck Mason most was how Henry apologized over and over, as if being bullied had been his fault, as if falling had been his fault. Mason's chest tightened. No one should have to apologize for suffering. The bikers helped Henry stand, and Mason held his hand to stabilize him. Henry asked who they were. Mason replied in his deep, calm voice that they were just people who didn't like seeing good men hurt. Henry didn't know it yet, but that moment was about to change his life and theirs. They brought him into the diner and sat him at the booth closest to the window so he could feel the warmth of the sun on his face. He smiled faintly, saying the warmth helped him imagine the world he once saw. The waiter recognized Henry. He often came alone. The bikers insisted on buying him a warm meal. Not just a sandwich, a full meal, but it wasn't the food that made Henry emotional, it was the company. He couldn't remember the last time people sat with him this way, talking, laughing gently, treating him like he mattered, asking about his life, his job, his late wife, the books he used to love. Henry spoke softly but with a depth that made the bikers listen more carefully than they had listened to anyone in years. He told them about his wife, Margaret, who passed 15 years ago, how she used to read to him every night, long before he ever lost his sight. He talked about the children they never had, the library he spent his life working in, and how quiet his home had become since losing his vision. He admitted that the world felt bigger now, not because he could see it, but because he had no one to walk through it with him. Mason felt something shift inside him. His group of bikers, tough and hardened in ways they rarely admitted, felt it too. They realized Henry wasn't just a victim of bullying. He was a victim of loneliness, and loneliness is sometimes more painful than cruelty. After the meal, Henry insisted he could walk home alone, but Mason quietly refused. Instead, the entire gang decided to escort Henry home, an elderly blind man walking through the streets with a protective circle of bikers around him. People stopped and stared, but not in judgment, in awe, in curiosity, maybe even in admiration. Henry laughed softly, saying he felt like a celebrity. Mason teased that he was the most important man in the city today. When they reached Henry's small house, the bikers noticed the peeling paint, the broken porch light, and the overgrown lawn that Henry clearly struggled to maintain. They didn't say a word about it. They just exchanged looks. Henry asked if they wanted to come inside, but Mason gently told him to rest. As Henry reached for the doorknob, he told them something that shook every man standing there. He said today was the first day in years that he didn't feel invisible. That night, Mason called the entire crew together. They weren't a charity group, they weren't a community service club, but they were men who understood loyalty, respect, and the responsibility of strength. So they made a decision. Quiet decision. The kind that doesn't need applause. The next morning, Henry woke up to the sound of engines. Not loud, aggressive revving, gentle idling. When he stepped outside with his cane, confused, he felt the warm sun and then heard Mason's voice calling his name. The bikers were there, armed not with weapons but with tools, paint cans, broomsticks, and determination. Without allowing Henry to feel ashamed or startled, they explained that they had come to fix the porch, light, repaint the house, mow the lawn, fix the fence, and replace the cracked pathway stones. They worked for hours while Henry sat outside on his chair, smiling in disbelief, asking again and again why they were doing this. Mason finally answered in a tone so genuine that Henry almost cried. He said kindness should never be a reward, it should be a habit. As the day went on, neighbors peeked from their windows. Some came outside to help. Some brought lemonade. Word spread across the street that the old blind man, who usually walked alone now, had an entire biker gang as his protectors. By sunset, Henry's home looked new again. But something even more important had changed. He no longer felt alone. Mason placed a hand on Henry's shoulder and told him that from now on, every Sunday morning, someone from their group would come check on him, bring groceries, fix anything broken, or simply sit with him for company. Henry's voice cracked as he thanked them. He didn't know how else to express the gratitude overflowing inside him except with tears. Weeks passed. Henry became part of the biker family. They took him to events. They read books to him at the clubhouse. They built him a special holder on Mason's motorcycle, so Henry could ride with him safely at slow speeds. He laughed more in those weeks than he had in years. Strangers recognized him around town. Kids waved to him. People nodded to him with respect. The sting of that cruel moment outside the diner faded into something else, a turning point. But the boys who bullied Henry didn't disappear forever. One afternoon, Mason received a message from the school counselor. 3 of the boys had confessed what they had done and wanted to apologize. Mason wasn't sure Henry would want to see them, but when he gently explained it to Henry, the old man surprised him. Henry said forgiveness was easier than bitterness. Bitterness hurts the one who carries it more than the one who caused it. So Mason brought the boys to Henry's home. Henry listened to their shaky emotional apology. The boys admitted they were ashamed of themselves. Henry forgave them instantly, telling them that kindness isn't just something you receive, it's something you pass on. And he hoped that one day they would pass it on too. What happened outside the diner could have broken Henry completely, but instead it brought people together. It changed lives. It reminded an entire community what humanity really looks like. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to the world. Before the ending, please comment, "Kindness is strength." Henry passed peacefully several years later, but his memory lived on within the biker group, within the boys who grew into better men, within the neighbors who witnessed his transformation, and within every person who heard his story. His life, once quiet and overlooked, became a testament to something powerful. Sometimes the darkest moment in your life becomes the doorway through which kindness finally enters. And in Henry's case, that doorway was opened by a group of unexpected heroes who understood one thing better than anyone: strength means nothing if you don't use it to protect those who have none.